Thanks very much for coming on. Welcome to one of my, it feels like Groundhog Day to me. This time last year, I think we went to the usual place. Where do you normally have your conferences, Jackie? You know, that hotel.
Whitbury Hall.
Yeah, no, not the conference, the actual, you know.
Oh, was it the Glebe?
Yeah, the Glebe.
Yeah.
So this time last year I was at the Glebe presenting to team people there, and we had a room full there talking about IR35. And obviously I've done a whole host of IR35 workshops since then, and of course we've had then we had a stop on it. So they've sort of, over the COVID period, they were less interesting, particularly at the beginning. I think people had more things to worry about, and I still think there's plenty more to worry about, but this is coming our way. So I'm starting to get much more of a demand for it again, and I've got about 10 or so workshops going between now and April anyway, so plenty of stuff. So I appreciate team inviting me on to talk about it. It's something that matters very much, particularly to those agencies that are working with a contingent workforce, or even if they're not at the moment, they intend to. If you're not used to working with the temps as much, maybe if you're in more of a perm agency and you're doing more temps, this will be relevant to you as well. So just a little bit about on who Number Mill are. Most of you will know me, I hope. It's a firm of ACCA chartered accountants. I set the business up about 8 years ago. My own background is I am a chartered accountant, and I specialise in employment, worker engagement, and particularly contractors. We've got about 28 accountants in the business now, and we do everything to do with accounting and financial management, but particularly we do focus on the recruitment businesses. A lot, probably 80% of our customers are recruitment businesses. So we do back office, we do year-end accounting, we do timesheet billing, payroll, pure outsourced payroll. Obviously we do umbrella, and we'll touch on that because that's quite important in this topic. And we're IR35 specialists as well. We're probably paying about 3,000 people a week, contingent workers a week at the moment. So I also, just for interest, I also ran and own my own recruitment business. I had 2,000 lorry drivers on my books, and I sold that business to Staffline Group in 2015. And now we are the preferred supplier. Number Mill are the preferred accountancy supplier to Staffline Group as well. So it's in your shoes. So I do understand just how difficult this topic is from a commercial point of view, not just from a legal standpoint or an accounting point of view, but from a practical standpoint. So I'm hoping this session is going to be very much giving you some practical guidance on what you can do. It's not just about talking, because I think a lot of people are aware of the law, they understand what's happening, but it's actually what you can do about it that's in a sort of practical way. So I'm hoping that that's what we're going to achieve today. So these are the types of companies, just a handful of companies. We've got probably over 800 odd clients that we work with at the moment, but more recently we've done quite a bit of work with consultancy work as well for some of the larger end hirers as well. So sometimes end hirers know we're in their supply chain, and sometimes they don't even know that we're in the supply chain. So a good example of that would be GSK. I did some consulting for GSK, and I happened to mention them that I was in the supply chain, and they said, really? And I explained how that was, that we were supplying umbrella contractors and also doing accounting for limited companies in their supply chain, and they hadn't even realised that. So that was some consulting work that I did there. We've done a lot of consulting work with councils more recently, councils where they previously were engaging contractors. They undertook the IR35 assessments themselves, and then found that they weren't being independent. So we got a fair bit of work doing some work for councils so that we could demonstrate that the assessments that they were doing were independent. Also doing some work with XBO. XBO I've made some significant decisions last year, as did DHL, around how they would engage their contractors. And obviously, because of my background in lorry driving, they called upon me for some advice on that. So lots of end hirers we work with, and obviously lots of agencies as well. So I see it from all parts of the supply chain. Yeah, so and across all sectors as well, lots of different types of sectors. So from the professional, public sector arena. So obviously we did a lot of work in 2017 with the public sector as well. For example, via Capita and the NHS and that type of thing as well. So all sorts of sectors as well. So I think this chart I like to put up because it really puts into perspective what it's going to do to your contractors. So people really need to understand the impact that this will have on somebody who's used to working via a limited company. So if you've got a contractor who's engaged by you and he's getting a limited company rate of, say, £100 a day, after taking into account his accountancy charges that he may have to pay, he is likely to take home about £440 a week. If he were to go on umbrella, and it depends on whether he's able to claim expenses or not, and the rules around expenses have become more tricky, and I will explain that a little bit on, but he'll get somewhere between £367 and £398 a week. So that's significantly less on umbrella than it is on limited company. And if he was to go on PAYE, he would take home about £350. So you're talking about £90 a week worse off to somebody on £100 a day. The higher up the pay chain, £300 a day, the worse it can get. So you can see that the impact on somebody's take-home pay, if they're having to switch from a limited company to umbrella or to PAYE, is significant. So they're not going to be very happy, are they? So it's very well worth understanding why that is. Now, fundamentally, if somebody's a limited company, partially, one of the reasons for it, and it is only a partial reason, because, you know, they're a flexible worker, they're taking the risks and rewards. And one of the rewards that has always existed since 1999 is that what you do is you set yourself up as a company and you set your salary at the tax-free threshold, which is about £12,500. So at that point, you won't pay any more tax on your salary. And then what you might do through the company is put through some expenses. You might also put a non-taxpayer, perhaps your wife or your son or daughter, onto your payroll as well, taking advantage of maybe they do some work in your business. Yeah? So ultimately, what's then left and what is taxed will be subject to dividend tax. So overall, you're going to pay less tax than you would have done under normal PAYE income tax. And that's what's resulting in this difference in the take-home pay. So it's very important to understand that the tax efficiency of it is going to cause a problem to that individual. Okay. The other thing that will cause a problem, and I have done this, is I've reduced the PAYE rate by about 20%. And the reason why I've done that is because most engagers won't be able to afford the extra national insurance, holiday pay, and pension costs that comes with that. So if you are going to move somebody to limited onto PAYE, you've got to consider that. Can you afford to take that extra cost? Yeah. So I've compared it by dropping that rate. Now, you may not drop it entirely, and that's something that you've got to consider. But you've got to understand, you as the agency paying that worker, if you're going to put them on PAYE, what it's going to do. So not only do you have to understand what it does to their pay, but what it's going to do to the cost in your supply chain. And I can demonstrate that in the next slide too. So this is what it does if you were to switch them onto PAYE. And this is where I was quite surprised when I do speak to people. And if I say to them, you know, you've got people on your that you've got contractors currently that you're paying by way of a limited company, and if you have to put them on a PAYE, what is it going to do to the agency's cost base? And then in effect, what would you have to actually charge the end hirer, your customer, extra to cover that? So just for a group of 20 contractors on £100 a day, so at the lower level, that would cost you as an agency, or indeed the end hirer, an extra £2,000 a week. So you can't afford to do that. So anybody that says, I'm going to just switch them onto PAYE, you will find that you can't really do that unless you're able to negotiate a very big increase with the end hirer. It's a significant increase with that end hirer. So can the end hirer afford to pay that? Probably not. You know, in the case of, say somebody's got 50 contractors and they're on £300 a day, that's an extra £18,000 a week. It's almost unbelievable, isn't it? But when you think about it, it's circa 25%, because you've got national insurance, 13.8, holiday pay, 12.07, pensions, 3%, and apprenticeship levy as well, 0.5%. So all of those extra on costs have got to be covered, and they've got to be paid for by somebody. So who's going to pay the cost of this? Is it the end hirer? Is it you, the agency? Or is it the individual themselves? It's probably going to be a combination of the two, of all three. Well, how did we get here? So as I said, the legislation itself was introduced back in 1999, and the aim of it was to make sure that people that were being paid weren't falsely self-employed and getting the tax-efficient benefits of being self-employed. So it was about making sure that if people were being paid, in effect, they weren't employees. So that was where the legislation came from in 1999. And it basically affected just the individual, and they were personally liable. So if the Inland Revenue investigated them, it was down to them to produce that they met the requirements of IR35. It didn't really matter to you, the agency, and it didn't really matter to the end hirer. But in 2017, they changed the rules and they extended the rules up the chain. So they didn't change them. So the fundamental rules around IR35, substitution, control and mutuality of obligation, were extended. They weren't changed, but they were extended up the chain to the fee payer and ultimately to the decision maker. And the decision maker was the end hirer. And that was introduced in April 2017 in the public sector. Now, one of the reasons that it was done in the public sector, the sceptics amongst us will say, is that the government and HMRC have a much greater control over the public sector. So they are able to tell them, we want to collect these extra taxes, but we believe that there is tax evasion going on. We need more money in the Treasury, so we're going to trial this out in the public sector. And of course, the public sector followed the rules. And in many cases, we saw a big blanket swing into the use, to not being able to use limited companies in the supply chain as contractors. And they just blanketly said, no, we're no longer allowing it. They will all have to pay PAYE taxes. And that started in April 2017. And I can discuss what happened as we go through. But again, in October 2018, the government announced that it was going to come into the private sector, and all of us were aware of that, and we went through these sorts of discussions last year. And as you know, because of the COVID, in July 2019, the government issued the draft legislation and the guidance through the private sector. And I think, you know, over the years, I've become used to this. We've always said, oh, the government won't do that. So, for example, when they said they would switch off the self-employed and the CIS scheme, the government won't do it. And then they introduced the Intermediaries Act, and the government said they wouldn't take away travel and subsistence, and yes, they did. And then in July 2017, they said about changing the rules on IR35, and we said they wouldn't, and they did. And then in 2019, we thought they wouldn't do it again. but they did, and they carried on saying that they would do it, and they were going to go live with it in April 2020, as we all know. And I have to say, I registered nearly 1,600 people on our umbrella in that last week in the run-up, which was... So that showed that everybody was expecting it to happen. And then, of course, because of the COVID situation, it was pulled at the last minute on the 17th of March in 2020. And I think, really, to be honest, it was the right thing to do. We've got enough on our plates with COVID as it was back at the time to cause much more confusion with regard to this. So the reality is, I think it was the right thing to do, and they pulled it. However, it was a delay, and it will go through in 2021. I've got no reason to believe that it won't go through. In discussions just this week with HMRC, they're adamant it is going to go through. So do not expect it not to go through. And furthermore, they need the money more than ever, I think. Yeah. So in July, they published the Finance Act with final IR35 rules. Some of you may have heard there's been a little bit of noise recently by some people in the sector, some lawyers in the sector that have said that they put inadvertently some rules in there that would make it difficult to have umbrella in the supply chain. I'm very well aware of this, and this is totally unintentional by HMRC. And again, as I mentioned, I've been speaking with HMRC just this week, and so have the FCSA, and they are about to publish a statement to say that that is not the intention. They need umbrella in the supply chain. So if you do come across that, I've seen a couple of headlines about that, please don't worry that we can't have umbrella in the supply chain, because we absolutely can. And I think there'll be something published very soon by HMRC with regard to that. And as soon as I've got that, I will publish it and I'll send it out in a mail shot for you so that you're reassured about that. So the plan is that the off-payroll rules, the IR35 rules, will come into force on the 6th of April in 2021. So have no doubt that it is coming. As I said, the rules themselves haven't really changed since 1999, the fundamental basics of them. The words IR35 are just a reference to the Inland Revenue Memo number 35 that was introduced back then. But basically, it's fundamentally about substitution, control, and mutuality of obligation. So back in the day, the worker was where the IR35 liability sat. So that arrow at the bottom points to where the liability sat. And that's where it's always been. But what they've done there, PSC stands for Personal Service Company. I do separate them because they're separate legal entities, but the liability sits with the worker traditionally. What the extension does is it makes the fee payer also liable, and it makes the public sector or the private end client now have a responsibility to make the decision whether somebody meets the requirements of IR35, they're inside of IR35, or if they're outside of IR35. And that's a massive responsibility for somebody, and for a very serious and complex whole range of law cases. So typically what's happened in the past is that because that liability is so great, the public sector and probably the private sector, the decision will be it's just easier to say that they're all inside of IR35. Because the liability is so massive. Can you imagine if you employ lots of contractors in your business, be you the agency or the end hirer, and the Inland Revenue say that you've been paying them gross, you shouldn't have been paying them gross. That could be, thousands of pounds, millions of pounds. So there is a tendency for them to be very, very risk averse. However, over time, that tendency to be risk averse has caused too many problems, because then they found that they cannot get contractors to work for them, because they're going to get taxed like an employee but won't have employment rights. So there has been a little bit of, well, I won't work in that way. So there were some instances where the individuals will say, well, I won't work in that way, and they'd leave. And we did see that in the public sector to some extent. But I have to say there is a greater move into just blanketly saying. Now, legally, this legislation says that you can't make a blanket decision and you should be assessing them individually. However, be that legislation or not, if an organisation makes a commercial decision to engage contractors in any way they like, they actually can. And that's about how they decide to do that. So this isn't just about law, this is about commercial behaviour. What's the difference between the public sector legislation and the private sector legislation that's about to come in? And this is to do with the small companies, okay? So if the end client is a small company and it's based on the Finance Act rules, i.e. with a turnover less than £10.2 million, balance sheet of less than £5.2 million, and or has no more than 50 employees. They have to qualify for two of these measures. And then the client is a small company. Now this is the client, it's not the recruitment agency. It doesn't, because I've seen this question come in. So if you're a smaller recruitment company and you're supplying contractors to a small end hirer that meets this criteria, yes, you're outside the scope of IR35. But if you're a small company supplying to a large company or a medium-sized company, they don't meet this criteria, then you do have to bear with this piece of legislation, and you will have to assess the individuals, or you'll have to make sure that taxes are deducted at source. So it's not you as a recruitment company that the small company exemption applies to. Okay, so it's very important that if you are working with a company, that you say to them, what size are you? Now, of course, you can look on Companies House, but remember that information is often out of date. So it's well worth getting a little statement from them to say, are you inside? Do you see these contractors to be inside or outside of IR35? On what basis do you do that? Are you a small company exemption client? Yeah, and then you'll have done your due diligence and you'll hold that on the files. And if you are paying them gross because they're a small company, then that can't be a problem for you if they told you that. Of course, if they fib or they lie to you, then they're being fraudulent and it's their problem, it's not yours. But you need to demonstrate that you did do that check. Overseas companies which are not resident in the UK and do not have a permanent establishment in the UK. Again, that's the same question that you need to ask. They're not resident in the UK and does not have a UK permanent establishment. So you would have to ask that question. Okay. Or if it's an unincorporated organisation, a turnover of less than £10.2 million. Okay. The small company exemption does not apply to the employment agencies themselves or any intermediaries. Hopefully that answers that question. So this is a chart, it's an inland revenue chart. I've just cut and pasted it from them. And basically what this does do, one of the learnings that we got from the public sector reforms is that we found that sometimes the end hirers wouldn't tell the intermediary, or they wouldn't tell the agency, or they wouldn't tell the worker what was the basis of their decision. So the legislation does say to the end hirer, you must say what the status determination is, if they're inside or outside of IR35, and anybody in that chain is entitled to ask what that determination is and why. So whereas previously I may have been in the supply chain as an intermediary, if I said to the NHS, why have you made that decision? They would say, mind your own business, nothing to do with you, Louise. And I'm now able to say, well, it is my business. I am entitled to know. Yeah. So everybody in that supply chain is allowed to know. Furthermore, the liability will pass back up the chain for anybody that doesn't meet their responsibilities. So as much as you're allowed to inquire what decisions have been made and why they've been made down the chain, you are also responsible for making those checks all the way up. So if you're the agency at the end of the chain and you're using a fee payer or you're using an intermediary, then you have to check that organisation that you're using is doing the job properly, and that organisation ought to check that you're doing the job properly, and they should be asking you the relevant questions as well. And that goes all the way up the chain and all the way down the chain. And anybody who doesn't do that, the liability ultimately will move up the chain. So if I don't do my adequate checks at my end, then that will move up the chain to you, the agency. If you're the subcontracting agency, then you don't do the checks, that will move up the chain to the next agency, and so forth, all the way up to the end hirer. So you can see that ultimately the end hirer has got a problem here, and as much as they will try and push the liability down the chain, ultimately it is their problem as well. So it's a joint one, and everybody should consider that it's their joint problem together. Okay, you can well imagine that this is why you're getting the situation where some end hirers are just blanketly saying, commercially, I don't want to engage with limited companies anymore. Okay, so you can understand that. They may have paid some very expensive lawyers to give them guidance. They may have paid some very expensive accountants, EY, KPMG, and all of these people are giving them a lot of sitting on the fence guidance. And that's the problem, because a lot of this legislation is pretty grey. And I'm going to explain how grey it is. But like I say, it's a commercial issue, and clients may dictate the solution. So as much as you can try and educate them, and I think it's good and important for them to be educated, to understand it, and also understand the impact on the cost base. Yeah? It's important that they understand that, the impact on your margins, the impact on the cost that you're bearing, and the impact on the worker take-home pay. It's good to educate everybody about this, but it may be them who dictate the solution. Okay, and you need to consider whether you're going to be able to get an increase in the charge rate with them. Well, will they be happy to pay an increase in the rate? Chances are they won't be able to do that. Yeah. Who is going to bear the cost of this? Because somebody is going to be worse off, somebody in this chain. The only people who are going to gain out of this are the inland revenue, obviously. They're collecting, I think in the case, the first year of the public sector reforms, they made about £700 million, which was a couple of hundred million more than they expected to make. So it was more successful than they thought, which means that there was more of a swing into PAYE and umbrella. So it is a commercial issue. We do come back to what the case law is, and this is why it is a particularly grey area. But fundamentally, it is about a series of cases that look at three tests. Control. Do I have any control over you? Is it a master-servant relationship? Do I tell you what to do, when to do it, how to do it? Am I controlling you? Substitution. Can you send somebody else in your place? Yeah. So let's say I'm a plumber and I'm not feeling very well today. Could I send my brother-in-law, who's also a plumber? He has to meet a certain criteria. He needs to be a skilled plumber, but can I send him in my place? Actually, if I can and I've got the right to do that, then I'm able to substitute. It may be that I don't have anybody I can send. I've got the right to do it. Yeah. So it's the right. And then mutuality of obligation. Now, mutuality of obligation means me as buyer, do I have to give you the work? And you as the seller and the provider of that service, do I have to do that work? If I was an employee, I've got an employment contract, and if you tell me to work on Christmas Eve, I will have to work on Christmas Eve. A great example of that was when I was at Milestone, and we had lorry drivers. And if they were limited companies, lorry drivers, and we said to them, we want you to work on Christmas Eve, we're extremely busy, they'd say, no, I'm going to the pantomime. I'm not going to work, because they didn't have to. It was a business-to-business relationship, and there was no control over them, no employment control. However, if they were employees, I'd have it in their rosters. You're rostered to work on Christmas Eve, you have to work on Christmas Eve. Yeah, it's part of your employment contract. So that's the sort of thing that we have to understand. Now, there are a load of myths out there. So people think that they understand IR35, and they'll say, yeah, that person's the same. He's doing the same work. He's behaving in the same way. He's wearing a company uniform, for example. He's driving a company vehicle, for example. And they would think that that person was caught by IR35 and they're an employee. It's not necessarily the case. And I'll give you some examples of these cases that do cause confusion. And one of the earliest cases that we used to rely on was in 1968 with a company called Ready Mix Concrete. And Ready Mix Concrete, you'll see them, they're still going today. They're the big lorries that have got the big like cement mixers on the back of them. Now those guys, the contractors there that drove those lorries, they drove those lorries and they were engaged on a business-to-business contract. But they wore the uniform. They worked to some shift patterns, and the lorries were branded Ready Mix Concrete. So on the basis of that, you would naturally think that they were caught on the inside of IR35. However, actually, they were considered to be outside of IR35 and they were not employees. And the reason predominantly for this was that the contracts were very well written business-to-business contracts. And they had in there a certain amount of risk and a certain amount of reward. So it was all down to how the contracts were written. And they were deemed not to be employees and they were outside of IR35. In the case of Express and Echo, this was about substitution. This was about people who were delivering newspapers, and they, wake up in the morning very early, and if they didn't feel like doing it, they might get their son to do it, or they might get their sister to do it. Yeah, we're talking about adults, obviously, in this particular case, but they were able to substitute, and they had the right to substitute. So therefore, they weren't deemed to be employees either. And in the case of National Power, this was about a group of tour guides, female tour guides. They were female, they just happened to be female actually. And I don't even know why I mentioned that. It's just adds a bit of colour to the story. I don't know. It's actually not relevant, so apologies. But they were a group of tour guides, and they, which I suppose it's because I'm so shocked that tour guides are taking people around a National Power, showing them off this National Power area. And anyway, this particular individual hadn't turned up to do this more than 17 times in a 12-month period. And that was deemed to be the fact that there was no obligation for her to do that. So, yeah, mutuality of obligation. It didn't exist. The case of Montgomery and Johnson Underwood, this was about the fact that all three tests, if any one of those tests is present, you have to look at it holistically, then the individual is deemed not to be an employee. Any one of the tests. So they don't have to pass all three tests, substitution, control, mutuality of obligation, or even two, just one. So, as you can see, to be outside of IR35 in the past was fairly easy. Not too difficult to be outside of IR35 in the past. So, Inland Revenue introduced a cess tool. So, how are you and your end hirers going to decide whether somebody's inside or outside of IR35? Now, so they've got this online tool, which took a great deal of development. Unfortunately, in 40% of the cases, it doesn't give an answer. So it's pretty unreliable. And it's also been heavily criticised that it doesn't include all of the case law properly. I know that they did update it last year, but it still doesn't consider mutuality of obligation very well. So it's not a great tool to use. And because in 40% of cases it doesn't give you an answer, it's not very useful. So you may want to consider working with people who actually have a tool that always gives an answer. So just to confuse matters, we've got some cases here that have recently, quite high profile cases, where they've won their case. So we've got Lorraine Kelly, we've got Kay Adams, and we've got Helen Fossborough. Now, these are all ladies in recent times, and therefore they're pretty high profile, and they were recent times, who were being told by the Inland Revenue and being investigated for working back sort of round about the two periods of time, 2013 through to now, and they were being investigated, saying that they were actually employees and that they weren't, they shouldn't have been engaged outside of IR35. Now, these ladies all won their cases. So, and, you know, it's hard to know why. Were they these happen to be ITV contracts, actually, and they were very well written, these contracts. So were they very well written? Were the lawyers particularly good at fighting the cases? Who knows? But, you know, in some instances, Lorraine Kelly, for example, was told that she was being controlled because ITV were telling her what she might wear. And her argument was, no, I'm not going to wear that. I'm not wearing my makeup or my hair in that way. I'll take advice from you, from your stylists, but you won't tell me what to do. And then part of the case law, that they said to her, well, you used the ITV investigators to do some of your research. And she said, yes, I did. I took advice from the researchers, but I didn't, I decide what I use. So the argument there was that she wasn't being controlled at all. And basically these ladies have won their cases. I put up Transport for London there. They were a good example of where they made blanket decisions around their signalmen. Originally, they were in the public sector, so they made some decisions about all of their signalmen being inside of IR35, and they had a walkout of signalmen. And anybody who knows anything about engineering will know that you can't run a railway without signalmen. So they had to backtrack on their decision. It was a big public backtrack, and now they do get the signalmen and a great deal of many other contractors in their business formally assessed. We do some of that assessment for them. This is St Thomas's Hospital. This was a big project, and again, they deemed everybody to be inside of IR35, and they had a massive walkout of locum doctors. So you have to be very careful. There's a huge amount of liability here, but blanketly saying that everybody's caught can result in contractors walking off site. These two looking more glum, aren't they? So Eamon Holmes and Christine Ackroyd, unfortunately, and I don't know if it's because they work for the BBC, but these two guys both lost their cases very publicly recently. So these cases were around about 2019. Now, is it bad luck? Is it the fact that the Inland Revenue are really out to get some big cases in the public knowledge? These follow slightly different cases, but you've got Uber, that was an employment case, and you've got Pimlico Plumbers, again, another employment case, so something slightly separate, but they're sort of all going at the same sort of point about trying to make end hirers responsible for collecting taxes at source. So again, it starts to muddy the waters. Again, HMRC would say that mutuality of obligation wasn't important. There's been a very recent case where the case was won with regard to mutuality of obligation. This is a particular case, and another one as well. So some more recent cases where they're losing due to mutuality of obligation. So you can see here, there's a whole mixed bag of decisions, and it's pretty difficult to get a hold on what will work and what won't work. So it's a risky area and a particularly grey area. And just to put it into perspective, in 2017, we did do a survey of contractors in the public sector. We managed to, we did their IR35 reviews on over 1,100 of them, and 87% of them passed. However, the public sector deems half of them to be caught by IR35. So that gives you a feeling of just how there is an approach of just saying, look, they're all caught. It's easier to say they're caught, whether they are or not. So just to put that into perspective. So what have we seen? A mass transfer into umbrella to toe the line. So they're being told, or the public sector or the private sector coming will say, look, they've got to be taxed at source. So it's got to be either PAYE or umbrella. And they've got to be taxed at source. So there's a mass transfer into that. And I want to make the point here, umbrella is, if it's a compliant umbrella, it is a PAYE solution. taxes being taxed at source. So if anybody says to you it's got to be PAYE, not umbrella, it is PAYE, umbrella is. And if you're going to protect your margins and your end hirer, that you want to protect them from having to increase the charge rate too much, you are going to have to consider umbrella. Whether you like it or not, there is going to be no other way to keep that price down or to keep your margins at the level that you can cope with. So if you've never considered umbrella, it's something that you need to understand. And I do understand why some people are anti-umbrella, partly because there's been a lot of tax evasion in the sector. There has been some poor players out there, so I can understand that. But if you work with a good umbrella that does the job properly, an FCSA accredited umbrella, then there's nothing wrong with them. And the Inland Revenue are very happy with umbrella. If they weren't, why would they have introduced the umbrella key information document? So there was a massive move into umbrella on that, and there's very good reason for that. In some cases, with a rate increase to the contractor to compensate him. Apologies there. So sometimes with a rate increase to compensate the contractor, and sometimes without a rate increase. We also have seen continued gross payments being made, sometimes with assessments going on and using independent assessors, and sometimes you're just taking a risk. You're just taking a risk as an agency, or your end hirer just taking a risk. Sometimes we've seen that as well. I've had a great deal of agencies and end hirers saying to me, can you assess them, but they're all not caught, are they, Louise? So, you know, that's not really the idea. If you are going to assess them, and you should get them assessed, if you are going to pay them gross, make sure that you get them assessed, make sure that it's done independently, and make sure that you've got a good quality assessment. We've seen a lot of aggressive tax models and the use of aggressive tax intermediaries, so be very careful with those. If you see organisations offering an IR35 assessment that takes 3 minutes, you can be guaranteed that that doesn't work. It's not going to take 3 minutes, unfortunately. We saw in-house incorrect assessments. So some larger organisations have decided to do the assessments themselves in-house, be those agencies or end hirers. The trouble with that is it's not very independent. You're slightly motivated to get the right answer. So you might want to consider whether that is the right answer too. We do sell software, Number Mill sells software, and you can use that and do the assessments yourselves if you want to. So we do it. I'm just saying that the question is, are you sure you're being independent? Where we went into the councils, we found that their managers weren't being independent. Okay, so they were making them outside of IR35 when actually they weren't inside, when they didn't meet the requirements. Seen a lot of blanket reviews, and unfortunately, if somebody's going to be taxed as an employee, then they're expecting employment rights. So we're starting to see quite a few employment tribunals going on at the moment. And I'm involved with one actually, just as an independent advisor, and I can tell you it's not something that you want to get involved with. So they were previously limited companies, now they're being taxed at source, and the company, the employees have all clubbed together and they're taken into an employment tribunal. So it's tricky. We also seen a lot of use of engaging IR35 technical specialists. Some people are using just the software, and some people are using technical specialists like my team of accountants that we have. And then, of course, we've got the fee payer model, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. Number Mill again do offer the fee payer model. It's handled with great care. So what happened back in the public sector? We saw a big swing. This gives you an example. Immediately a big swing into umbrella, nearly 50%, and about 18% still continuing to be paid along a gross, but either gross with or without a fee payer involved. And then even though there was some resistance to umbrella, we've ended up with a high volume in umbrella. So 46, nearly 70% ended up in umbrella there. The question mark is for those we just don't know. We don't know what happened to them. Okay, and that was a really big sample. That was, we sampled something like about 8,000 contractors. So it's, you know, that's a really massive representation. That's one of the biggest surveys we've ever done. So it was a big one. So it continues to unfold. We did see some contractor shortages. We've seen some increased costs in the supply chain. I'll give you another example of that. I worked with some agencies where they had paramedics, and instead of continuing them to pay them as limited companies, they just basically promoted them. So gave them an increase in their pay scale and promoted them into a different pay scale, so that they could pay them more money. And they were being paid by the umbrella, but with more money. So it's added costs in there. There's no doubt about that. They've added costs in there. We've seen a black market and a very unlevel playing field. Contractors going here, there and everywhere. Nurses particularly, we saw this, they're not particularly loyal. The agencies are very concerned about this because if you're a compliant agency and you're doing the right thing, the NHS have said that they need to have PAYE tax deducted at source, and those nurses are finding agencies that are happy to pay them gross, or through an intermediary that are happy to pay them gross. Then the nurses won't stay with you as an agency, they'll go somewhere else, and that's a really difficult world to be playing in. So we'll see that, I think we'll see that more and more in the private sector too as well. Lots of disgruntlement and tribunals. As I said, aggressive use of tax schemes, and obviously an increase in the use of a compliant umbrella. So practically, what can you do? And let's not leave it so late, guys. And I get why people leave it late. No, everyone's hoping that the problem will go away. It won't go away, but it's going to take too long. If you've got contractors on your books, you've got to understand between you, your contractor, and your end hirer, you need to understand what this is going to do to your business. So you need to be talking to your clients. You need to understand what their stance on this is, because if they're going to say to you they've got to be taxed at source, PAYE, be it deemed, be it umbrella, or be it on your own PAYE, or you're going to outsource it, that's going to take a little bit of work, isn't it? You've got to understand that. So we offer consultancy from that point of view. We can take your payroll, we can look at it for you, we can give you some advice, we can go to see your clients with you, we can do these Zoom meetings with your clients and explain it to them. We can do the maths. The maths is complicated. Working out the impact on your margin, working out the impact on the pay rates, what to do with the charge rate. That's the type of thing that we can do. Don't leave it. It takes time to do that. So if you've got a lot, you may want to consider that. Certainly, we do template letters as well, template communications that can be given to your contractors or can be given to your end hirers to say, this is what we're doing, do you agree with it? Are you happy to go forward with that, Mr. Client? What's your stance on this? So we've got that type of thing as well, so we can help you with that. Obviously, we've got FCSA accredited umbrella. Now the FCSA, you may have noticed very recently, over the last couple of years, we've been inundated with people applying to get accreditation, and we've had to slow it down because we were finding that people, because of the change in the IR35 rules, too many people were making the application and getting through the process. And we found that there were a couple of people which we've had to then throw out of the organisation that shouldn't have got into the organisation. So there's been a hold on people applying for accreditation whilst the review is done more deeply. So Ernst & Young are one of the parties, I think Safri Champners as well. They review the umbrella. They're looking at their the employment contracts, they're looking at the process and practices, they're looking at the pay slips, they're checking that the RTI and the tax is being paid over, they're checking that it's totally transparent, they're listening to calls, checking out the scripts, looking at the communications and the marketing documentation of these umbrellas to make sure that they're doing the job properly. So work only with FCSA accredited. There's plenty of them on there for you to choose from. At least you know that there's an accreditation and there's been a check there done. And It's being done by people who understand it. The files do go to the Inland Revenue, and the Inland Revenue are working very heavily with the FCSA, and there is talk about regulating the industry at some point. So if you're going to work with an umbrella, make sure it's one of those. Okay. There are other badges out there, but they're not worth the paper they're written on. They're not independently reviewed. So unless they're using an independent firm of auditors and passing the files to HMRC, then I just don't see how that's independently done. There's the Professional Employment Organisation. Now, this is a fancy term, really, for what I call umbrella billback. Now, we offer this as well. What this doesn't do is it doesn't give the agency the margin saving. What it does is it makes a simplified payslip. So the umbrella employs the contractor, so the employment liability sits with the umbrella, and it's a very simple payslip because the employer's national insurance and the pension, the ERS pension, isn't shown on the payslip at all as a deduction, and possibly there's no margin on the payslip either. Those charges are actually agreed with the agency and billed back to the agency. So it doesn't give the savings of umbrella in terms of national insurance or holiday pay, but it does remove employment liability. So if you're not interested in the savings and you are able to bill it onto your end client, but you don't want employment liability, you don't want issues of statutory sick pay, tribunals and all of that type of stuff, and you want your workers to be able to travel from agency to agency and not have to keep changing their tax codes, umbrella's the best answer. But if you are able to bill it on, and you're able to take the cost, then perhaps the Professional Employment Organisation is the one for you. So that's one that we also offer as well. Okay. IR35, we have an online tool. You can just buy the tool. It's $49.99 per assessment. There's a minimum package that you buy, and you can merrily go and do your assessments. Okay. But like any other accountancy service, it's insured in the normal way that accountants are, but if it's wrong, it's your liability. Okay, that's the way accounting works, and I'm not going to pretend. Lots of people will say, "Oh, it's totally insured. You're covered for total tax investigation." There is no insurance in the world that covers you for tax loss. It may cover you for the costs of lawyers to help you. Yeah, which is what we have with that, but it doesn't cover if in the case of Eamon Homes, there's £500,000 worth of taxes to be paid. No insurance in the world would cover that. Okay, so don't believe that when people say that. In addition to that, we offer the IR35 online with an expert accountant. So with that, we do the assessments. It's an online assessment that's done, but one of the accountants will do a review, and they'll do the assessment and they'll provide a professional written opinion with the basis of that decision. So in all cases, we will provide a status determination document, but with this one, we'll give a very detailed written opinion as to why we've made that opinion. And that's a very useful set of documents that you can hold. The revenue come in and say, why did you make this assessment? Why did you pay them gross? This is why you've done it. So that should be a very good defence for you. We also offer a service for arguing status determination. Now, warning to this, do you really want to get in an argument with your clients? Yeah. So sometimes your contractors might want it, but just handle with care. We do it, and we have done it, and we've been very successful at changing in clients' minds or and indeed agencies' minds. We have been successful at doing that, but just handle with care because you may not want to get into that argument at all. And then, of course, we offer the Protect service, which is where we contractually insert ourselves in the contractual chain and we become the fee payer. Now, this is where we are legally responsible for any loss of taxes. This is way better than any insurance. However, we don't do it lightly, and we'll do the assessments, and only if we're very happy, because remember, I am personally liable here for the Inland Revenue to come, and I will only pay the individual gross if I'm very, very comfortable with the outcome. And if they don't meet it, then we put them automatically for our umbrella. So it goes all through. So you've got a whole package of services here, which Number Mill offer all of these. And of course, there's plenty of other people in the market who do too. So by all means, have a look at them. Umbrella, just in case any of you don't really understand how umbrella works, this is the FCSA definition. It's an employer of contractors, freelance professionals who compete in different, who do lots of numerous assignments at various locations for lots of different agencies or end hirers. So they might work for a month, a week, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 10 months, 12 months, 24 months. They're going from site to site, job to job. Sometimes they're long, sometimes they're not long, but they're able to go without changing their tax code and without changing their employer. And that's why it's got its advantages. There are no lock-ins with umbrella. You only pay when you work. Yeah, contractor only gets a deduction, a management margin deducted from him when he works. Yeah. So there's no issue here with registering your guys. If you've got a group that you've decided, let's say you've done your analysis and you've decided with your end client that actually there's a group of contractors here and they're inside of IR35 and there's nothing we can do here, they're all going to have to go umbrella. Yeah, there's nothing to stop you doing the job now, saying to them, come April next year, you're going to have to go with an umbrella, register with them now. Right, so you say that to them. And you've made your choice of umbrella company. Let's say you've picked, if I'm lucky enough, you picked Number Mill, yeah, and you communicate that with them, to them. We've given you a contract letter and you communicated it to them, and you said, here it is. You can register online with Number Mill. You register online, and automatically you'll get the pack. They'll get the pack, and they can register. Now, not one penny will pass from them to Number Mill until April the 6th. Yeah, and even then it won't pass to us if they're not on your books anymore. And even then it won't pass to us until you, the agency, send those funds through to the umbrella company. Yeah, so there's nothing wrong in getting your ducks in order now, getting it all sorted out now, because you can do it. They're not locked into anything. So make sure that you're getting ahead of the game and you're not leaving it to the last minute. It was ridiculous at the end of last year, the volume that was coming in, and nobody could cope with it. Nobody, not even the massivest, the biggest umbrella in the world could cope with that volume. So try and get yourself sorted out now. I'm working with a number of agencies at the moment who've got, 10, 20. Sometimes I've got one that's got over 500. I've got one that's got 100. We deal with all sorts, but they're getting ready to do the communications now, making their decisions now, and getting the guys registered now. And we're able to give them a report that says, yes, these guys have registered. When we do a volume transfer, we'll calculate it, we'll work it out, we'll agree with you what the uplift will be, we'll give you some communications, we'll agree that communication. I know I'm running behind now, so apologies, try and catch up. And we'll give you some draft communications, we'll discuss with you how it's going to work. We'll give the individuals an online registration. They can do it online. That will be supplemented with phone calls to explain it. We've now got a little video as well. They can do it on their phones. It's like an app. They don't have to do anything on paper or anything like that. They can e-sign the employment contracts as well. So it's all online now. We've really got some good stuff. And the little video that we've got as well is nice and quick and easy as well. So it can be done very easily and quickly. The contracts are automatically issued, so we know. They'll get a follow-up welcome call as well. And if you'll also get an account manager and you'll get a regular report if there's any volume to it as well. So you'll know, let's say you've passed us 10, you'll get a regular report that says, okay, 8 of those 10 have registered, 2 of them we can't get hold of, we can't find them, or that one's angry or whatever it is, and you'll get an up-to-date update with that. So I just want to touch on the fee payer, Number Mill Protect. That's where we insert ourselves in the chain, and that's the difference between insurance and actually us being liable. So that's the contractual chain, and it's only there where you're actually covered for tax loss. It wouldn't be your problem, it would be our problem. Then whenever you come and say, why did you pay gross? You say, I didn't, Number Mill did. So that's the difference. I'm going to skip over these. FCSA, very important with umbrella companies. Watch out for aggressive solutions. If there's a solution where there isn't a charge to the worker, Unless it's a PAYE bureau, which by the way we do too, there's something wrong there. How's it being funded? Yeah, who's going to do it for nothing? Anybody who claims they've got QC or HMRC approval, that's rubbish as well. HMRC don't ever endorse anything. If the take-home pay on a PAYE or an umbrella model is 90% or above, there's something wrong with it. I'm telling you that. If there's no PAYE reference on the payslip, look for that as well. If you work with an intermediary, an umbrella company, make sure that you check out the directors' backgrounds on companies' house. If they've got hundreds of different companies attached to them, there's something odd. If they've Phoenix payroll company after payroll company, again, there's something very odd. If they're offshore, there's something odd, so don't work with them. So Phoenix companies aren't great either. If they're offshore, foreign directors, directors in the Philippines, India, Isle of Man, those types of places as well. So be very, very careful if you see all of that type of activity. Assessments that take too long. And the joint employment model, this is to do with VAT. It can be run, but it has to be run very, very careful. So anybody who's working with a supplier who claims that VAT doesn't need to be charged, please give me a call because I can tell you all about that. I've got a great deal of experience in it. So here's an example of the type of stuff that we issue. So there's the consultant's report. Gives you an idea. So I can take some questions now. Right. How do I see these? What are we doing, Jackie? Are we turning people back on so they can ask some questions, or?
Yeah, absolutely. There aren't any questions in the chat, but I guess
Okay.
if anybody's got a question, unmute yourself and go for it.
Yeah. Does anybody want to ask some questions? Really?
Hello.
Oh, hello. Who we got here?
Hi. Elkie Holland from Prospectus IT. I sent you 3 questions through actually, but I sent them direct, sorry.
Okay.
Could you, just 3 things I missed, I think you covered them. It's very lovely talk, thank you very much. The £49 that you mentioned, was that for the test, the assessment tool, or a monthly basis? Could you re-clarify?
Per each, it's per assessment.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes. So each individual. So where we do the assessment and we use an accountant, we charge £125 plus VAT. Yeah, and that's either the contractor pays for it, the agency pays for it, or the end hirer pays for it. Whoever pays for it gets it, and that's with us using the accountant. If you use the software, it's only £49.99. Yeah, and if there's a volume, the price goes down. Actually, I can't remember that, but I can give you that. I can send you the pricing list for that.
Is your software then different from the CES tool? Because why would a client agree to pay when they say, I can use the CES tool?
Because, as I said at the beginning, maybe you did miss it, the CES tool won't give an opinion in 40% of cases.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, so our tool will give an opinion. The reason why it gives an opinion is because we've done, over the years, so many assessments that we're able, the algorithm accounts for all of the case law that's, it gets added to all of the case law that keeps coming out, we keep adding to it. So it'll always give an answer. I think it's unfair to not have an answer. How can you make a decision?
No, I know, I've had that recently with someone. 2 more questions, sorry. The next one is, just very quickly, on the slide where you were talking about if they're a smaller company, where does the liability then sit? It moves down the chain from them. If I'm bigger than them, does that mean the liability then sits with me, or does it shoot back down to the contractor?
It goes back, it's always with the contractor. Liability for IR35, it has always been with the contractor and will continue to be with the contractor. It's not like he's got out of this now. It's just the law has extended it up the chain. So liability moves up the chain to the fee payer, the agency, the fee payer, the intermediary and or the agency, and then to the end hirer as well. With the small company exemption is just for the end customer. If the end customer is a small company and you're supplying to them a contractor and they're a limited company, then there is no requirement for you as the agency, the fee payer. It doesn't matter. This IR35 liability doesn't extend to you, provided they are a small company and you've done your DD to check that they're a small company.
Okay. And then, yep, thank you. And then last but not least, have you got some information on the services so that we can basically borrow that to market to our clients and use them as a value-added service?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So after this, I'll package it all up. I've got it already packaged up. We've got a lovely brochure. It's called We're All in It Together. Basically says it's the end customer, the contractor, the agency. Everybody's got liability, and it's a lovely glossy brochure, tells everybody everything. And I would encourage people to read it. I know people get their brochures. It's online as well. You can look at it online. People get brochures, they stick them in a drawer and they don't read it. But you know what? If you took 10, 15 minutes to read it, before bed, on the train wearing your mask, you would understand a great deal about IR35. Very quickly, you'd understand a great deal about IR35. So it's well worth reading it. And then, of course, I've got a summary of all of the services. The headline pricing, and I say headline pricing because in particularly an umbrella, we're very competitive because it's a big market out there, and if you've got volume or anything like that and somebody's using an alternative provider at the moment and they're getting a good deal, I'm never going to walk away from that. So I'll give you the headline prices, but if there's any discussion about it, we're happy to negotiate. So I'll send all that out to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so anybody else got any questions?
Yeah, got it.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I've got a
go ahead.
question. Sorry. Hello.
Okay, Dawn, do you want to go?
Yeah, thank you. So I only got about 12 contractors, and I believe they fall outside of IR35, but I think it would be worth me paying the £50 to be belt and braces. If I go ahead with that with you, do you issue the status determination document? So in essence, I've kind of feel like I'm pretty covered, that I've checked everything out.
Yes. If I'm really honest with you, the software, which is the £50, I give it to you, you do the assessment, it automatically produces a status determination.
Okay.
It isn't belt and braces. The 125 plus VAT is belt and braces. That's where one of our accountants will give you a proper report and an opinion.
On
So
each contractor.
it's your choice to weigh up, how comfortable you are with it. By the way, those assessments are only sold in a pack of 10. So you have to buy 10 of them. And the reason we do that is because we need to get a trend. We tend to understand, where the agency, the sector or the type of job is going. So we need to do a batch of 10.
Okay, can I ask another question? So I've also got another business that uses the same contractors, which is a contracting business, which we could talk, separately. Yeah. Would that cover me for that then, once I've looked at those individual contractors, if we just badged it up in the other company? Yeah,
it would. So this, both the software and the assessments where we do it, and that can be bought by anybody. That can be so in effect for your other business, that's the end hirer, isn't it? You're the end hirer in this situation. So you've got the double liability there.
Yes.
So in that business, yes, you particularly need it. Oh, one thing I didn't mention, just in case anybody's in construction, if you've got CIS contractors with limited companies, IR35 also applies. Some people, for some reason, think it doesn't apply. It applies very importantly. So just because they're CIS, if they're limited company CIS, it does apply. So, yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention that. Okay. Any other questions? A gentleman spoke up a little while ago, I think.
Yes, Louise, that was myself, Kevin. Most of our attempts at our agency are run through pay-as-you-earn. So only occasionally come across the sort of self-employed contractor scenario. But I did ask whether this has any implications for normal pay-as-you-earn workers. And oddly enough, since posting the question, I have had a note come through from ARC to say that the initial HMRC guidance seems to suggest that you have to do a status determination for all workers, including pay-as-you-earn people. Is that what you're referring to before, that might be, that's going to be changed?
Yeah, these. Well, sorry, but they're stirring up trouble. This is not the intention of it. At the end of the day, if you've got them on PAYE, you're deducting tax at source. So where's the loss? You know, where's the interest in that? You know, you're deducting the tax at source. It's being paid over to the Inland Revenue. Why would the Inland Revenue care about them? So this is just rubbish. So that's not the intention. There is a bit of noise about it, but no, and I can assure you that there'll be a statement coming out from the Inland Revenue very soon to knock all that back. Okay. You've got to know as well that sometimes these organisations that issue these, if they've got personal interest, you know, so organisations that predominantly specialise in limited company contractors, they only do limited company contractors, suits them they don't really want people coming off of limited. They want to make umbrella look ugly. They want to make PAYE look ugly. So they're doing that for their own reasons. They're trying to muddy the water. So I'm not saying it's rubbish in terms of the law, because the lawyers have found a little problem with the wording, but that's not the intention, and it will be changed. They will change it. Okay, does that help?
Oh, yes, yes, thanks so much, Louise. I mean, that was my feeling, but the guidance was, I think it was for when you get a new request from a new client that you had to do an SDS for everyone, which was obviously concerning. If it is clearly a pay-as-you-earn worker, that should be then.
Well, I'd love to tell you that, Kevin. I could charge you. I could sit there charging you a fortune for doing all of these assessments, wouldn't I? I'd make a fortune, but, you know, I'm not dishonest. Yes,
No,
Kevin, all of your PAYE
the answer you gave is the answer I want, so thank you for that.
I'm honest. Anybody else got some questions?
Sorry, Les, I joined the meeting late. Would you please explain to me a bit about this umbrella, and then you mentioned something to do with the liability and insurance. I didn't get it very well. Would you explain that too?
I could, but it would take another hour. So
maybe just send me.
Yeah, I think maybe Donna. Sorry, it's not Dawn, is it?
Lorna.
Yeah, if you want to contact me separately, I'm very happy to talk to you and explain it to you. Do you mind? It's just I don't want to, you know, tie everybody else up. And yeah.
Lorna, we are recording the session as well. So once we've cleaned that up a little bit, we can send that out to you so you can play it back and hear exactly what was said all the way through.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just I'm really conscious I'm over time now, and I don't want to. Yeah. Anybody got any questions that are burning that they'd like to ask now?
Just one quickly, Louise, from my side. You mentioned the CESS tool. Sorry if there's a bit of background noise as well.
Who have I got here? Who am
Sorry,
Ross.
it's Ross from Focus Select.
Okay, hello, Ross.
Hello there. Just I had a call around the IR35 side of things from someone else recently, and they said that HMRC are only going to take on board the CESS tool determination from the SDS side of things, and anything else they're going to wash through and completely ignore. Is that the case or not? Because I want to do
No, not at all. Not at all. Do you think that Lorraine Kelly used the CESS tool? Do you think that's how she won her case?
No, absolutely. This is sort of the conversation I tried to have with her, but the lady was sort of saying she's just come out of HMRC meetings and was very adamant that it's the CESS tool that they're going to be using. If it's not been done, then effectively they're saying it's whatever else assessment is going to be sort of ignored.
Okay, so what would you do in that case where, like I said, 40% of them you don't get a status determination? What would you do in that case?
Hey, I'm not in that situation at the moment, am I? So I wouldn't know. But what I want to do is I want to make sure that we don't get any sort of comebacks or any penalties, and we're going to do it all sort of efficiently and properly. And they're saying their tool, but they're saying that they could do their own assessment from their side of things, but equally they will also they will also do the sort of the CES side of things, so at least they're sort of covered off from the CES sort of funds, and that's what she was sort of adamant and saying to us on that side. So at the moment it's April time, and come January we pick up on it and get it all done and get our, like say, ducks in a line and get the people involved. But until then, you know, that was just something that she sort of commented on, and I sort of thought, okay, crikey, if that's what HMRC is saying, do we need to do that?
I mean, the reality is, no tool. There is no tool that is 100% accurate, because, as you can see, the case law is proving it that way. You know, so in the end, if you get a case, you end up in court. You'd have, if it's your liability, you've got to fight that case. So you've got to be, if you are going to make gross payments, you've got to be pretty comfortable that you're making those gross payments in the right way. Now. And there's nothing that will give you that 100% assurance. My tool doesn't give you 100% assurance. My team, I cannot give you 100% assurance. The best QC barrister in the country will not be able to give you 100% assurance. Let's be honest about it. So if you want 100% assurance, you're not going to get it from anybody. But what you can do is demonstrate that you took good due care. Yeah. So, you know, if you've got real doubts that these people aren't really actively behaving like real contractors, and the relationship isn't one of being totally in business to business, taking risk and reward. If you don't believe that in your heart, then don't take the risk with gross payment. If you are comfortable with it, then get yourself some evidence, and then you've got the evidence, you've taken the good due care, and that's all I can say. There is nothing that's going to give you 100% reassurance, and none of the insurances out there will give you that either. It might give you a lawyer to help you start, but I mean, most of them are pretty low level. £100,000 is a typical accountant's insurance for that type of thing. That's not going to last you very long in a big case, is it? So, and that's probably why the move into umbrella is so much more. Is safer. It's a safer move. It is a safer move, and I say that as somebody who offers limited company and IR35. So you know, and we do all of this. But the safest way is to do FCSA umbrella. There's no doubt about it, because taxes are being deducted at source. Yeah, but the commercial view is that, you know, you may want to pay these as limited contractors. Maybe they're very competitive. They'll move somewhere else and they're not loyal. So that then puts the risk sort of reward debate in your hands. So it's a difficult one, but nothing's going to give you 100% reassurance, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I know it's not the answer everybody wants, I'm afraid. Okay. Do we have any more? Okay, well, look, my email address is there. You can contact me anytime, or obviously go through to the office and speak to one of the other guys, or go on the website. If you want to contact me, obviously the whole point in this is to help. We will send some stuff out. So, but I'm over to you to close off, Jackie. Sorry it went on so long.
That's perfect. Thanks ever so much, Louise. I think there's some nice comments thanking you personally in the chat there, if you want to have a little look. So I think you've made that very clear to everybody what they should and shouldn't be doing, or at least clarified everything. So we are going to, as I said, we've recorded this session. We are going to just clean it up, edit it a little bit so it's tidier for you, and we will send the link out to all of you within hopefully the next week. Louise, if you're happy, you can share your slides with me. I can send those out at the same time, but I'll also share the email addresses with you, Louise, so you can follow up directly with people if you want to. But if there's no other questions, guys, you've got Louise's details, as she said. Let's thank her very much for hosting today, and look forward to seeing you all soon.